Hi, I'm Chris, as I said like 3 times before. And I'll be talking about the history of Lightning and history of off-chain protocols, or layer 2, or you name it, whatever you want. I like to call them off-chain because it doesn't imply a hierarchy of layers, but I'll use all the 3 terms interchangeably anyway. I like to have interactive presentations, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate, just ask. I don't care if we can't make it through the entire slide set. For me, it's important to actually give you a better understanding of what happens, and if we don't get to the later slides, that's totally fine as well. Okay, so before we can talk about the history of Lightning and off-chain protocols, we probably need to first see what all the deal is about in the first place. What are off-chain protocols? Off-chain protocols are usually systems in which you have sort of a couple of users using data on a blockchain and managing it without touching the blockchain itself until the very last minute. So what we do is we have this sort of example of data that is on a blockchain. We have Alice, Bob, and Carol each have 5 Bitcoins on their account, and now Alice and Bob want to open an off-chain contract, a payment channel, and what they do is basically they lock some of the state of the blockchain so that they cannot modify that state unilaterally anymore, and then they go into a separate room basically and start discussing on how they split or how to settle this state in the end. So the initial state, which I represent with this scroll here, is basically the same as we had on chain, right? Alice has 5 Bitcoins and Bob has 5 Bitcoins. And now we can start interacting. And we can, for example, transfer 1 Bitcoin from Alice to Bob, changing the balances, and we have this transaction which basically represents the final state of this transfer. Then we can go ahead and transfer some more from Alice to Bob, and we can even transfer some back, and eventually we're happy with what happened. One of us wants to leave, one of us has disappeared, but we want to reflect these changes that we discussed off-chain back onto the blockchain. So what we do is basically we send the state back to the blockchain sees the desired state, removes the old state and applies the new state to it. What's important here is that these intermediate states are always aggregates of multiple individual states. So as we've seen before, when transferring 1 Bitcoin from Alice to Bob, the final state was 4 and 6, and then we transferred 3 more, and the final state was 1 and 9. So sort of this association between the individual transfers gets lost when reapplying it to the Bitcoin blockchain. It's also important to see that in order for this contract to be on the right to be able to be reflected on the Bitcoin blockchain, we need to have this in the form of a transaction, because that's the only thing that the Bitcoin blockchain, the only operation that the Bitcoin blockchain will understand and will let you execute. So this is the very simple concept. And what we actually need for this to work is we need some way of updating the state, of basically making sure that we agree on what the current state is and what it would look like if we were to go on chain. And the one really important issue with this is that if I'm Alice, I like this state because I have 6 Bitcoins, whereas initially I had like 5, right? If I'm Bob, I like this state much more. In this state I have 9 and Alice has 1. So we need some way of making sure that the older states are not applicable to the blockchain anymore. And that's what I usually call an update mechanism. And that's the core issue that we're trying to solve in all of these off-chain protocols. How do we renegotiate something off the blockchain and make sure that only the latest agreed upon state is actually enforceable on the blockchain, and you can't cheat and go back. There's a little bit more around there's a little bit more supporting infrastructure for off-chain protocols, but this is really the core issue. Okay. So I'll be mostly talking about update mechanisms and see how they evolved over time. So update mechanisms. Does anybody have a guess what the first update mechanism is going to be that I'm presenting? What could be the first one? Ah, you actually got it right. So the first ever replacement or update mechanism that was in Bitcoin was already in the source code released by Satoshi himself, the sequence numbers. This is actually not Satoshi's code. This is as far back on GitHub as I could go. This is from Series M, a commit in August 2009, but I think it's the same. I couldn't go back any further. So the idea with the sequence numbers is basically we create a transaction, we send it out there, and then we create a new transaction that replaces this transaction, and we hope that miners will replace it. But the issue, of course, is miners do not have any incentive, and if I'm cheating, I could even go to the miners and say, hey, if you confirm this transaction, I'll give you a cut of 25% or so. So you can actually incentivize miners to behave against this protocol, and even worse is that you can't even prove that a miner misbehaved because he could just say, no, I didn't see any updates before I mined my block. Because if you could actually hold the miners hostage. Anyway, so nSequence numbers are cute. They don't work. And it's the reason why we repurposed this field a number of times in the meantime for other purposes, which actually makes the semantics of the nSequence field really hard to grasp. Okay, so the first actually working payment channel implementation or off-chain protocol is what's called a simple micropayment channel by Spielmann et al. Actually, I'm not sure about the date. This idea has been floating around Bitcoin talk forever before, and I think Spielmann was the first one to actually put it in words that made sense. But that's always the issue with the Bitcoin space and the Lightning space. Somebody has always proposed it before you. You're never going to be the first one. And then you publish a paper and everybody says, yeah, that's this old idea from 2011. Yeah. Okay, so the simple micropayment channel is simple. It basically starts off with a green user and a blue user. The green user puts up 5 Bitcoins and transfers them into a shared output owned by both the green user and the blue user. And the color of the dot actually represents who has control over it. So in this case, we need signatures from both the green user and the blue user to actually spend these funds. What does this do? It basically prevents me, if I'm the green user, from pulling out the funds below the contract without giving the other side the control. It's basically just me putting up $10 on the counter, and as long as these $10 are on the counter, both me and the barman, we have control over it, and I can't pull them away and try to sneak them away. Okay. Now we need some form of state representation, and that's, as I said, is going to be a transaction. So we have a setup transaction which creates this channel, and we have a settlement transaction that represents the cumulative state of all of our intermediate transfers. In this case, I just get my 5 Bitcoins back, and the other party gets nothing. At this point, I sign it. Well, I'll drop those dots in future because this is the only part where signatures are important. So the green party signs it and gives this half-signed transaction over to the blue party. The blue party now has 2 options. This transaction is incomplete. They could add their own signature, completing this transaction and publishing it into the Bitcoin network. Or they can put it into their back pocket and say, yeah, I don't know, he set up a channel, maybe he wants to pay me. So blue user just keeps it in his back pocket, And now we actually go and confirm this first transaction. So I'll always use the lock to represent stuff that is on-chain, and the box without a lock in there to represent floating transaction or a transaction that we haven't confirmed just yet. Okay, now we've set up the channel. We can actually go ahead and transfer some. So in this case, I transfer the green user transferred 1 Bitcoin to the blue user, creating a new settlement transaction, again signing it. I can't do anything with it because the blue signature is missing, but I'm handing it over to the blue user. The blue user again has the option, okay, do I sign it? Or maybe there's more coming. And in most cases, they will actually hold on to it and say, yeah, maybe something else is coming up. So indeed, we do this a few more times, and eventually we have this final state. The blue user now sees, okay, I need this money, I have to get it now, or the green user disappeared and yeah, I don't want to wait for him to come back. So what the blue user does is it takes the transaction that gave him the most funds, adds a signature to it, and broadcasts it in a Bitcoin network. And eventually this is going to be confirmed. So this is a very simple payment channel that has been implemented a number of times. We have actually built some prototypes of access points being paid using these Coke machines that would dispense using these micropayment channels and so on and so forth. Yeah.
But is there any mechanism to avoid the counterparty doesn't disappear and freeze the fund on the multi-sig?
So you mean the blue party disappearing or the green party disappearing?
One.
Okay.
Well, actually, because you start with only the blue guy, only the green guy initially freezing funds, and obviously it is the
yes.
blue guy.
Okay, so that's a very good point. What happens if people disappear? So the easy case is when green disappears, blue can just take one of these transactions, sign it, and send it off. If in the initial state, or any state in between, the blue party disappears, then we have a problem, right? Because, well, the green party does not have any way of recovering those funds. For this case, we create an additional transaction that is time-locked, that would refund basically the entirety of the funds to the green user, basically forcing the blue party to either close or stay active.
And this was part of this suggestion?
Yes. So the reason I left it out is because it adds more complexity and it's really ugly. It also gives your channels a fixed lifetime, which is as soon as you denominate some limit of how long this can stay active, it sort of gets ugly. But we had this refund transaction that would actually work.
Another annoying question, like, does this depend on the malleability fix? Like, I think it is prior to the malleability fix. So, given the refund transaction, does it depend on the malleability
yes.
fix? Or?
So the refund transaction had this reliance on a malleability fix because it would need to be created before this one could be confirmed. So you had a transaction that was unconfirmed, and you had a refund transaction that was also unconfirmed. And the refund transaction was referencing the unconfirmed transaction here. This one could be malleated and thus detaching this refund transaction. That's an ugly thing indeed, yes. You could work around it with OpCSV and stuff, but it's also ugly.
That's the main reason why OT Lightning Network needs this fix, right? Because you wanted to basically spend the transaction before it was confirmed.
Yes, so all of the malleability fixes are always pertaining to I have some transaction that is not confirmed, i.e. it can still change, and I want to build onto bolt-on transactions onto that one. So that's indeed the core problem we have with malleability when it comes to off-chain protocols. Okay. So simple is good, but is it good enough? Anybody see a problem with this? Well, I know you already saw part of this.
There doesn't seem to be a mechanism
Yes. So the issue really is that these are unilateral channels. You can only ever, if you're the green party, you can only ever send, and the blue party can only ever receive. Why is that? Because the blue party will always be incentivized to use the latest, the state that gave them the most funds, and so yeah, we can create a settlement transaction that transfers some funds back to green, but why would blue ever use that one? Because it gives him less funds in the system. So indeed, I used to call this replacement by incentive, because blue is always incentivized to use the latest state. If he misbehaved, he would basically give back more money than he should have, but I mean, he's at fault, so that's okay. Okay, so this is a simple mechanism. It worked for some things, but one major drawback is that all of these funds can only ever be used once. So it's basically like credit card, where I charge at the beginning of the month, and then I can just spend it. And once I've reached my limit, well, then I can throw away the card. There's no reuse of funds multiple times. Okay. So what we came up with in 2015 is what's called a duplex micropayment channel, and that's really a system which allows you to transfer back and forth multiple times.
Did you actually come up with this? So you published it in 2015.
Yes, so I think it was around Christmas that I had the core idea, and
This was 2014.
2014, and then we wrote the paper, which is always a long process, and then we submitted it. It was under review for 4 months, and in the meantime, the Lightning Labs guys published their paper. So I had a really exciting long weekend trying to understand what they do, because the Lightning paper is really hard to grok. And in the end, it had so much overlap that I decided, yeah, let's forget about duplex micropayment channels. We'll just jump on the big bandwagon there. There's quite some motion going on there. But the reason I'm showing it here is basically that it's also rather simple, even if limited, and it gets us closer to what Lightning actually does. So what we have here is we have again the setup transaction being confirmed on the blockchain, and then we have a representation of our state that spends this funding output and basically represents the aggregate of all interactions we had in between. If you're wondering what this t equals 100 means, that's a time lock. That basically means, well, it's a simplified time lock. This basically means that this transaction will only be valid at day 100. So we set up this transaction, let's say at day 0, and then we have to wait 100 days for this transaction to be valid, and then we can settle. So how do we do replacements? Well, we create a new settlement transaction that is valid slightly before that one. So that means that in the time between day 99 and day 100, only this new transaction is valid. And if we can make sure that during this 1-day period we can actually have this transaction confirmed on chain, then the old state with T100 is effectively replaced. And we can do that a number of times, and as you can see, it basically counts down towards today. So this is sort of ugly-ish, but also ugly in the sense that now I have to wait like 96 days to get my funds back. That's really bad. The solution here is to differentiate between a collaborative close and a unilateral close. So in the unilateral close, all I have is both parties have a copy of this transaction. The other guy goes away. So now I have to wait like 96 days for it to confirm, but I will get my funds back. And in the collaborative close, we actually have this the system where you and I agree that, that we want to close this channel, that this is the final state. So let's just sign a copy without a time lock and be happy. So if we do a collaborative close, we can create this transaction which is valid immediately, and we can settle the channel without having to wait at all, and everybody's happy. One of the important parts here is that, unlike in the simple micropayment channels, here the state is symmetric. Here I don't have this guy signs first and this guy signs later. I hold a half-complete transaction, you hold a full-complete transaction. In this case, we're always dealing with fully complete transaction, fully signed transactions. And this will be important again with Lightning. Okay. So we can have this collaborative close and we'll just settle it. And now for the one that everybody has been waiting for. The Lightning penalty mechanism, as I like to call it. Lightning penalty is asymmetric again, which is why I emphasized that before. So we have some data that only the blue participant knows, some data that only the green participant knows. And the security of this protocol relies on the green participant not learning anything from the blue part, and the blue participant never learning anything of the green part. So if you ever try to do a backup on Lightning, that's why. Okay. So what we do is basically we, instead of creating one settlement transaction, we create two identical ones with one little difference in here, namely that this output that goes to the blue participant and is known to the blue is encumbered with a bit of a poison. And I'll show you how to use that in a second. So we have these initial states 4 and 1, 4 and 1, and they are mirrored. So now we want to create a new update, 3 and 2, 3 and 2, and we run into the usual problem, right? How can we ensure that this is the only version of the off-chain contract that will be enforced, and this one can't? So as I mentioned before, the outputs that are known by the blue participant and go to the blue participant, or the green participant and go to the green participant, are encumbered a little bit. And the way we use that is basically we give, when the blue participant wants to convince the green participant that, no, I'm not going to use this transaction, what they do is basically they hand a transaction that steals their funds. They hand that transaction to the green participant, basically saying, hey, if I ever publish this transaction, feel free to steal my funds. And the same goes for the other side. In this case, the green participant could use this transaction to get 4 Bitcoins here. So it creates a punishment transaction that takes these funds and rewires them to go to the blue participant. And then he sends this transaction over to the green participant, basically saying, hey, if I ever misbehave, if I ever try to confirm this transaction, which I promised you that I wouldn't, feel free to punish me. And we can do that several times. So in this case, we've just updated to 4 and 1. And again, we've poisoned the old transactions in such a way that if they ever leak on chain, then we're going to die. And the nice part about this is this can go on indefinitely. That's a huge advantage compared to duplex micropayment channels. So duplex micropayment channels had a limited time life. The reason for this is because we were counting down Timelocks towards today, and when we've reached today, there is nothing we can do. We had a bit of a workaround there with an invalidation tree, and because that's the go-to place for computer scientists to find their solution. It doesn't work, let's use a tree. yeah, it wasn't that nice. Okay. But this is basically Lightning penalty. This is the most complex update mechanism I have to present here today. So are there any questions? Is everybody a Lightning expert and I'm wasting my breath?
Are you going to talk about eltoo and another talk?
Yes.
Okay.
That one.
And does the whole, I think I heard you say before that you think it's a bad model to like penalize so strict people.
Yes.
Are you going to get into that in the eltoo talk? Or
I can basically.
What are the trade like? Why do you feel that way? Like, what are the trade-offs there?
So one step back. In this case, we are actually punishing the misbehaving party, right? We are not. If for example the blue participant publishes this transaction, it's not enforcing the latest state we agreed upon, but it enforces that yes, green gets his money back and some more, and blue gets nothing. So this is why I call it LN penalty, and why everybody is like, hooray, cheaters are going to be hit on the head. I don't quite like the penalty model because I had some really awkward situations where people were backing up stuff and then restoring nodes, and then it's really easy. If you forget anything of this happened and you restore this state, then it's not your fault, but you're going to cheat. Even if you reestablish contact with the other party and say, hey, by the way, I have this state, the other party can say, whoa, that's really old. Yeah, you go publish that. You go ahead and do that. And so there's this sort of deadlock where I can't do anything, and if I do something, then I'm going to be punished. And that actually happened to me while at CoreDev here in New York. I was sitting in the middle of the room and I was like, yeah, I'll just restore this node quickly. I'm sure I've stopped it before taking the update. And suddenly, in the middle of the room, you hear me crying out because I was like, what the fuck happened here? And it turns out the node was not shut down. And I reconnected, and the other side actually said, yeah, you go ahead, publish that one. You'll be fine. I wasn't.
But, so with eltoo, you have not the same problem, but similar problems, don't you?
You have a similar problem.
If you publish an old state, and you don't know all the newer states, the other side could pick up the new state that is like most beneficial to them.
Yes.
Like a newer state.
Yes, but
so still it's a problem. Like it still not enforces the other party to get to the actual state.
yes,
Because that's what you said before. That the problem is that you don't recover the actual state. It's
exactly. So the advantage here is with eltoo is that I actually can outsource all of this. It's not me. Well, I'll get to that later when I'm actually talking about this. But what I don't like about the penalty mechanism is that it's really, even for it, it makes stuff really hard. If you back up stuff, we've had loads of people that were using the Google backup from Eclair, and we're like, oh, I can replicate this node multiple times and run it on my phone and my laptop and my tablet, and then they were like, what just happened? Because they were using it concurrently and they were backing it up to Google Drive and then restoring it, and then okay, it's just really bad. Yeah.
Riverfield's old node, I had 7 breach closes.
You had 7 breach closes.
Yeah, where it's entirely
in your favor, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you.
It becomes really annoying because then I have to see whether I refund the customer and they keep complaining, oh, I backed up my wallet, they rented it.
Yeah. So it also makes the whole state machine really complex when you're implementing this. We had this one issue, I think with René, where the other side misbehaved and we stole their funds, but forgot about our own funds. So that's a really fun corner case to try to debug, and it took forever to actually find it. So the more complex the state machine is, the more blocks you will have, basically. Yes?
So basically we need to keep like sequence of all the secrets mapped to their corresponding states. And if you want to have multiple devices, you need to have them sync to the same state, right?
Yes. So having multiple devices, you would probably prefer to open multiple channels that are not shared among devices, or you need to remote, or having one device be a slave to the other and the other one is actually running the nodes. Yeah, sharing states among multiple nodes is really bad, and it makes this really painful. Sorry.
So talk about like virtual channels where you could have multiple nodes that act as one.
Yes. So what you can do is there's two things that I'll talk about later. L2 actually allows you to have multi-party channels, because this asymmetry which you have here is no longer there. And there is also a proposal called, well, two proposals. One is Perun, which is some Nordic god of lightning. And I'll always pronounce it with a Spanish accent, which makes it super weird. That allows you to have virtual channels that map to real channels. Or you can have channel factories, which are basically bigger groups that then bootstrap channels off of this large group. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question. Are you aware of like other projects with type of off-chain payment technology that they actually use? Like, I think Storchain doing Duplex or something like that. Are you aware of it?
So I'm aware of a few projects that go into that direction. One, of course, is Rebind, which is a one-to-one clone of Lightning, basically. And I had fun giving a lecture at Stanford. I had really a lot of fun half an hour before the lecture started recreating the smart contract for Rebind, and it's 20 lines. So that's like $3.5 million of funding per line. Really good value. And there is, of course, the whole state channels. Is it called state channels in Ethereum? But there's a no, Sprites is a mechanism to ensure the timely settlement of payments. But state channels is yeah, state chains is the one in Bitcoin, and state channels is the one in Ethereum, where they basically have arbitrary contracts running over off-chain protocols and then reflecting that state back onto the blockchain itself. And it's really fun because Perun is basically was created for these state channels, and they were like, yeah, no way this is going to work on Bitcoin, and yes, it's working. So treat Ethereum like a testnet and backport whatever is useful. Okay. And let's go on to L2. L2 is a proposal that we created or published earlier this year, and I like to think it's easier than Lightning, but we'll see about that. Okay, so we have the usual setup thingy, and then we have a settlement transaction. This time it's not, I drew it below here, and if you can see the small clock, basically means that this transaction is time locked. So what we do is basically we create the setup transaction and we immediately create the settlement 0. And the settlement 0 just gives back the money to the green participant. And we encumber this transaction using a time lock. So basically this settlement will become valid after, let's say, day. Okay. If nothing else happens, well, green gets his money back and we're done. Now, if we want to do an update, we basically just create what's called an update transaction, update 1, that takes this output and creates a new output that has exactly the same structure. And we attach a new settlement 1 to it, which reflects the new state. So we just transferred 1 Bitcoin from green to blue. We've invalidated this by double spending it. So this is no longer valid because the update basically just spent this one. And yeah, that's how updates work in eltoo. You can do that a number of times again. So update 2 activates settlement 2, settlement 1 is discarded, and so on and so forth. That's basically the whole trend. Yes?
How does it, it's a double spend on chain if you're matching all these?
Yes. So I didn't mention this, but you can actually replay the entirety of this protocol on chain, which makes it really easy to visualize. We can actually do this interactively on chain. So in here we have 24 hours to create an update, and then the update gives us another 24 hours. And if we update in time, then we get another 24 hours, and so on and so forth.
In particular, what you could do is if your time block runs out and you don't have a new state, you just make an update with the same state again.
Yes. So we could just refresh the timer by having a dummy update. Anybody see an issue with this? It's shitloads of transactions. So indeed, for every state update, we actually have one transaction. So we could just have done this on chain as well. So what we do is now we lift off this off the blockchain and say, okay, instead of replaying this entire thing on the blockchain, we just keep the chain of updates in memory and always only the latest settlement, because that basically is the path that we need to take for to get to the latest settlement. So let's say the green user wants to enable this this state here, right? So what he needs to do is basically to let's not use that. That's a complex case. He wants to enact this this state. So what he does is he publishes update 1. Then he has to wait 24 hours to settle this. The blue participant sees, wait, you're trying to cheat me. So what he does, he publishes update 2 and 3, and then has 24 hours to wait before he can send settlement 3. So what we actually do is we allow you to initiate a settlement using an old state, but we'll just tag on, right? We'll just continue. Yes?
So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, he's double spending the settlement 1 transaction so they can't go to the blockchain with that because the time lock is encumbering it. So you can get update 2 first, right?
Yes.
And then replay update 3.
Yeah. Okay. So the time locks are always there so that the update gets priority over the settlement. Okay. Exactly. Yes?
What's that? So if I'm green participant, what's that? Stops me to put the settle 0 if I have the less balance now.
This settlement 0?
Yeah.
Well,
The time block.
So the time block is for the funding transaction.
Yes.
So yeah, that's not value.
yes. So sort of the short answer is we'll just use a month or so for this time lock. So we still have a limited time lifetime for the channel. The more advanced one is that we have a trigger transaction that is placed in between here, so that we have the funding transaction that creates the shared output. We have a trigger transaction that initiates the time locks, and only then we attach settlements. So think of it like the settlement 0 does not exist, and update 1 actually initiates the countdown. So we have ways to make this open indefinitely.
So the settle 1 actually have a balance 5-0 in this case.
Yes. So yeah, the numbers don't quite add up. I should add the trigger transaction, which makes it easier. So the issue here was that we basically had this this problem of we are basically, if we have n updates, we're replaying n transactions on chain, right? So what if we could do something like this? Instead of having the update 3 connect only to update 2, we could actually go ahead and say, I connected to the settlement transaction. And so we just skip all of these intermediate updates. We skip to the one that we are interested in, and then can do our settlement. And that's actually what SigCache no input allows us to do, which is a proposal that we're currently trying to propose, I guess. But so far, I've not heard too many negative voices about it. There's two complaints. One is it allows for double spending for replay attacks. But then again, we have Zcash none. And the other one is it doesn't go far enough. We should parameterize everything. And to that, I just say, first, we need use cases before we open up more flexibility.
What is a replay attack for?
So the replay attack basically means that if you have, so in this case, replay is wanted, right? We can have funds. So this transaction can spend both this output and this output, and if they weren't connected to among themselves, then we could basically just replay that transaction and get it multiple times. So if you use funds on an address and you want to send them to me and you sign them with Zcash no input, then I could take, and you have more than those funds lying on that address, then I could basically rebind the transaction that you send to me, I could rebind it to any of your other outputs and basically grab whatever is on that address. So there needs to be some care taken about how much you expose yourself to that, and we usually just generate new key pairs for every single one of these dots. That's a simple solution.
Can you just review what Zcash is?
So Zcash basically just is a little flag in the signature that tells us what information is part of the signature and what isn't. So Zcash no input basically means that we are signing in the transaction that we want to authorize, but we're leaving out some parts so that other people can come, or even I can come and change that slightly without invalidating the signature. So that's basically this. In this transaction, there's a small reference in the form of a hash to the previous output that I'm going to spend. And instead of taking this whole transaction and just signing it, we'll just carve out this little space and sign everything around it instead. So that keeps some flexibility in there, allows us to rewrite it without invalidating, and yeah, has some nice effects. Yes?
Let's assume that Bitcoin 18 doesn't come through.
Yes.
Wouldn't you still build eltoo and have this upper, like, I mean, the updates is basically a linked list, right?
Yes.
So if you construct them in a way that it's like a script list or like a tree, you said before, computer scientists solve every problem with a tree.
Yes.
I mean, then you have something like the payment channel that has a million states, and you basically need 20 on-chain transactions to, unless you have collaborative flows.
That's,
I mean, it's still.
So the alternative would be to have this transaction and sign it like n times. So that's one thing. But you can't get around to having at least one signature for each output that existed at some point in the system. So even if you do a skip list, you have to have a path from every single node up to the next level in the skip list and up to the next level in the skip list. So you're not gaining that much. So you can move signatures from having to be transferred to, okay, yeah, we structure it as a skip list, but you'll still have to remember n signatures in total.
You have to remember them. But
Yes.
I mean, when it really happens on chain, you don't have to go the full path of update 1, update 2, update 3. You just have like an algorithmic depth of on-chain transactions.
No. I mean, what you can do is basically have this update and sign it n times bound to every single one of them, and I give you this bunch of signatures, and then we don't have to have an on-chain footprint that is any bigger than Zcash no input. But you have huge messages, yes. And the skip list is a trade-off where you have smaller messages, but also have a bigger on-chain footprint.
Is there like a possibility that the person could agree someone state that it would be more cost prohibitive for them to broadcast, like pay the transaction fee for that than update 0? Like I could build up like 1 million transactions. I go broadcast update 0. The other party now has to like play that kind of footprint. The skip list.
So if you cheat, we can make you pay the fee and not give it back to you, but It's always hard to sort of punish one party in the case of misbehavior, because misbehavior is not observable on chain. Misbehavior is only observable by other parties that know about the state of the channel. And so we can't really build a punishment into the state transaction without having interaction with the other party. And I think I'm running short on time, yeah. Yes, so I had a few more slides, but as I mentioned, great interactions. It's basically layers all the way down. We have discussed the update mechanism, but there's many more facets in there. We have what we've just talked about are these two boxes here, and the Lightning Network is a lot more than that. We have a transfer layer that allows us to have multi-hop and a secure end-to-end payments. Basically, either my payment arrives or it doesn't. We have the Sphinx layer, which obfuscates which path we're taking through the network. We have a gossip layer that basically exchanges information. How can I go from point A to point B in the network? And there's a whole lot of transport layer encryption and feature negotiation and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I had channel factories, cool topic. Perun, we've talked about this before. It's one of the things that I'd like to backport from the Theorem folks because it's rather nice. And that's it. I'm out of time, so but I'm around the whole week. So if you have any questions, cool.
Are there any further questions? We can run a couple of minutes. If anyone has any really good questions.
Yeah.
Are there any questions that Timelocks? Is the duration arbitrary? How is that? 24 hours?
So there's a few. So you can express time locks both as a timestamp or as a block height. And in block height, obviously the granularity is like 10 minutes or whatever your block interval is. And the timestamp based ones, I have absolutely no idea why they are in there. I guess it's medium time past the block size, what they're referencing. But I always use block-based time locks because they're easier to reason about, and they're actually absolute numbers that do not have this issue of is it now 10 p.m. or is it 1 second to 10 p.m. So I guess the upper bound of this is like what's the upper bound of this, 5 million or so, 5 million blocks. So you have quite some time to settle your channels. Yes.
Yeah. So 2 questions. First one. So eltoo is actually working with HTLC just as Lightning, right?
Yes. So what I wanted to show in this slide is basically that the LM penalty and eltoo are basically drop-in replacements. The entire rest of the stack remains the same. All we do is basically we change the way we negotiate new states, and HTLCs are just part of the state that is attached to a settlement transaction.
And the benefits of eltoo is basically no penalty transaction and no negotiated states.
So it's way less painful because you don't have a penalty. Backups are possible because even if you publish an old state, well, the other guy will just get you a newer state. You won't lose everything. The state management is much easier because, well, we now have symmetric state. There is no okay, if I leak this information and you can try to kick me in the butt like that. And you keep far fewer state because there is no way for the replaced information to ever leak on chain. Whereas with LM penalty, you still have to keep all the secrets from removed HTLCs. Otherwise, because these HTLCs might actually leak on chain, this is no longer possible with eltoo. So it's much easier from a state management point of view as well.
Any disadvantage? Any disadvantage?
Any disadvantage? I think depending on how we implement it, we might have a footprint that is slightly bigger. And we, so one more transaction instead of having like 2 transactions, we have 3. And in the case of SIGHASH no input not making it, we'll have a really hard time actually trying to implement it. So this is one of the cases where I sort of break my promise about layer 2 and off-chain protocols being really nice because they allow you to experiment freely. Not really, because we actually need to change the base layer as well. So that's sad. I would have liked to get it working without, but I haven't figured out how to yet. Cool. Thank you so much, and I'll be around.